Hello, I'm Dr. Teresa Penbrooke, and welcome to the next episode of GP Red Presents. This episode is focused on considerations for reopening for recreation and parks facilities. I am very fortunate today that I've got three experts joining us. Debbie Woodbury from the City of Alexandria in Virginia, Linda Smith from the town of Chapel Hill in North Carolina, and Danny Hopkins from Salem, New Hampshire. All three are heavily involved with helping their communities and departments figure out how to best reopen facilities on a phased, safe approach as we go forward and try and deal with kind of hopefully emerging in the next few months out of the pandemic. Obviously, there's a long timeline, so a lot of different considerations to keep in play, but I hope you enjoy these interviews. Please like and subscribe to our channel because this will really help us provide more videos for you. If you need any additional information, you can see the comments below. Also leave comments if you want new topics, and then we will also be providing some resources with this episode on the webpage and also below. So enjoy. Thank you. So as you know, the topic that we're talking about is considerations for reopening recreation facilities and parks. And I know that I've been following a lot of your posts, and we're on a variety of different listservs and Facebook groups and things like that. And I know that you've been posting a lot of really great ideas about what you're doing. So I would love to hear your thoughts. But before we get started, can you just provide a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure. So again, thank you so much for having me. I currently work with the City of Alexandria, the Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Activities, and I oversee and coordinate non-fee and fee-based classes, programs, and camps. I also engage in comprehensive recreation program and planning for teens, aquatics, after-school, 4-H youth programs, senior and adults. So I also manage pool, teen center, and overall recreation center operations. There are numerous community partners that I collaborate efforts with, such as the Alexandria Health Department, Department of Community and Human Services, as well as several nonprofit organizations and other stakeholders.
Wonderful. So you're connecting with a lot of different people in Alexandria. And so I know that you've been involved with kind of strategizing with the senior leadership team about how to, right now, most of your recreation facilities are pretty much closed. Is that correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you've been kind of strategizing as we go forward into how you do kind of a phased reopening. And so can you talk a little bit about what you think should be considered as, I know you've been gathering information from around the country and that to apply, I think the thoughts are that should be considered.
Sure. So reopening obviously will vary by locality and will depend on your local and state health departments. Customers will also vary in their feelings about attending large events or even dropping their child off to summer camps. But what we do know is that ensuring patron and employee safety is our number one priority. As we receive guidelines from the CDC and local health departments, it is imperative that considerations are made to ensure that we meet guidelines for physical distancing. Our organizational mission is to create meaningful experiences through public spaces, cultural activities, and programming, and we are committed to doing so safely. We will also enhance our cleaning measures, ensure our capacity for physical distancing, and provide and or require personal protective equipment. We're all familiar with meeting fatigue, and now is a great opportunity to reprioritize initiatives and be intentional with meetings as they may continue to operate through online platforms.
Great. Well, so what do you see are the biggest challenges in reopening?
Yes, there are numerous challenges that we face right now. First, obtaining public buy-in and voluntary compliance. It has been challenging keeping patrons off of our fields and basketball courts, and we have deployed park ambassadors to remind users about physical distancing. A second challenge will be ensuring safe physical distancing while meeting the needs of seniors and youth. We must work to ensure that our efforts address the lack of social interaction that vulnerable populations may experience as a result of isolation. Another challenge this pandemic has brought to forefront is the recreational inequities in communication and resources. We currently do not have the ability to reach all community members due to language barriers. However, through coordinated efforts, our city is currently printing flyers in 4 languages. There are other challenges that this pandemic has brought forth, such as obtaining personal protective equipment for staff, fiscal implications with the loss of revenue, gauging overall community needs, and planning for the future.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds like you guys have really spent quite a bit of time planning. So just a question for you, and I know we didn't talk about this before, but what kind of insights around our profession have you seen? What do you think about what the role of Parks and Recreation is going? Is it going to change as we go forward, or what's your thoughts about that personally?
So I can honestly say that I'm most impressed with the flexibility of our park and recreation professionals as we step up to meet the needs of our sister agencies. Some of our efforts include stepping in to provide and deliver food service for the school spring break and upcoming summer breaks. We train and provide temperature checks for staff required to report to work. We serve on health department call centers to provide information and guidance for those with questions, using our rec center as a 24-hour safe place for shelters to house homeless patrons needing to follow stay-at-home orders, and providing child care and public safety for members who are required to work. So for us, it's a matter of doing what's right for our community. Every community is unique and is presented with varying challenges, and we've decided to step up and assist our sister agencies.
Wonderful. So one thing you mentioned was that you have ambassadors that are helping remind people around social distancing. I know some communities are trying to figure out how much policing effort, and every community is different in terms of what the restrictions actually are. But how are you training your ambassadors? I mean, what are they supposed to do if they come across people who are kind of going against what the restrictions say?
So first and foremost, we train them to obviously maintain their physical distancing as they approach patrons that may be utilizing the fields in an unsafe manner. And then we just ask them to just be mindful of the physical distancing requirements that are currently in place. And then just engage in light conversation with them, no need for confrontation or to escalate any situations. And then the police has also agreed to step up and assist our efforts. So we're trying to be that in between the police department and the public, and kind of utilize some of our networking with people in our community that may speak different languages. We'll have staff that will go out and speak with them as well.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, I mean, we know that there's such a strong opportunity for us to help people be physically and cognitively active, and how important that is in our communities. And I think we're really seeing that Parks and Recreation is emerging as, quality of life is this big piece in our communities, and all of a sudden it's always kind of been taken for granted, and I'm really seeing that we have an opportunity for us to kind of excel in this situation, as long as we can work with our public health folks, and obviously with all the necessary restrictions to keep people healthy. So do you have any other considerations that you think agencies should keep in mind as we go forward and start to hopefully emerge from this? Obviously, we have no timetable.
Yes, well, we are responsible for essential public services and functions, and these shall be provided and maintained even under abnormal and challenging conditions. And some predict that things will get worse before they improve. And as a result, we need to be as prepared as possible. Plans should be in place to ensure the continuity of service delivery with necessary modifications. We know that we will not be returning to life as previously known, but what we do know is that we must prepare to gradually reopen in phases and allow for adequate physical distancing. So during this time, it is imperative to maintain and ensure the well-being of our staff and who are serving as first responders. Barriers are now elevated in our community with technology, communication, and affordability. And as park and recreation professionals, I ask you, how are we alleviating and removing these and other barriers?
That's a great question. How are we removing barriers? I know that we've done a previous episode on kind of creative programming and online programming. Can you talk a little bit about some of the creative programming ideas that you all have implemented in Alexandria?
Yes, so as many other jurisdictions, we are providing virtual programming. So we are working with our contractors and some of our partnerships to provide online platforms. So we working to offer our boxer-size class. I did a Tuesday fitness challenge, and those classes are available via YouTube, Facebook, and other platforms as well.
Well, right now I am the Community Service Director for the town of Salem, New Hampshire. It's an edge city for Boston, just over the Massachusetts line. Population is about 30,000. And we have a variety of programs under the Community Services Department: Elderly Affairs, Parks and Recreation, Parks Maintenance, and a very aggressive recreation program.
Wonderful. And you also work part-time for Greenplay.
Yes, I do. I'm a project consultant for Greenplay. It's been a wonderful experience. I've had the great opportunity to work for a number of communities and assisting them in their overall planning and programming.
So how are you trying to plan ahead for your staff and your community in terms of looking at reopening and phasing and that sort of thing?
Well, the first step is, step one is to make sure that all the safety protocols for staff are in place. Right now, we are working remotely when we can. I'm actually working remotely this couple of weeks because it impacts everybody differently. I had to actually fly several weeks ago and flew into Boston Logan Airport and required me to quarantine myself for 2 weeks. So my wife is actually staying at my son's house, and me and my daughter at my house, in my apartment. So those are the unique things. We're working with staff to make sure that all of their issues are addressed and that the safety protocols are in place. That's our first step. We pretty much have that down now. As far as opening up, we're looking at virtual connections, which have been doing and are increasing. The first step we felt was to stay connected with the community. So our preschool that was closed, we have virtual Zoom meetings with all of the students, and our instructors have been working with them. Recreation, we have been trying to stay connected with our community through virtual events that we have put on. And also our seniors, we've done, oh gosh, it's got to be 3,000-4,000. As I said, our senior citizens are huge, and they're all in love with our senior center. And we have 4,000 registered members. So we have done about 3,000 wellness calls over the past 2-3 weeks just to check in and make sure they need anything. And what the great thing about that is, with our senior center being closed down, we actually allowed our emergency operations folks to use our second floor of our senior center. So they didn't have to work out of the firehouse, because a lot of those firemen are exposed on a daily basis to potential COVID issues. So yeah, we've been working, trying to stay nimble and doing as much as we can. As far as the next steps, summertime, once we figure out what we're going to do, we're going to try to initiate recreational programs that have all the safety protocols in place and the social distancing protocols in place. And how that exactly looks right now, we're still working that out with staff.
Yeah, so how are you, we've talked with other colleagues around the fact that everybody's kind of making it up right now, and yet at the same time we're trying to gather as much information from our colleagues in the region and around the country. How are you kind of getting your information to make your decisions at this point? There's several inputs of information. One is coming from the governor. The other is the regional planning efforts that we have through our local news media. And then I work closely with the fire chief and the police chief in formulating approaches, because one thing that we have to be very sensitive to in Parks and Recreation, as always, is we have impacts on other departments. And with this type of issue that we're dealing with, our efforts really have to be vetted through the police and fire, because the potential of certain activities could put stresses on their already stressed resources. Mhm. I know that I've heard of some communities are keeping their beaches closed primarily not because of the social distancing on the beaches, but because they don't want to have an incident that, they don't have their emergency response team set up.
Mhm.
And so it's really about protecting the staff and keeping them available so that they don't have to go out and do rescues in the water. So I think it's amazing the different impacts that we're seeing around the country.
And to give you an example of that, some of our X game type of activities like skateboard parks and stuff like that, we have really encouraged our skateboard community to just be patient with us because we don't, there's a higher potential of injury there and EMS responses. So we have really encouraged them not to use the skate parks. And again, it has to do with resources and evolving information, how the COVID is transferred, social distancing, everybody is wanting right now. What we're experiencing is phone calls from all different recreational programs, tennis, can we open up the tennis courts? Can we play singles, golf? A lot of the golf courses are looking at New Jersey, just south of us, just open up their golf courses. So we're getting calls because we run a lot of golf league programs. We're getting calls, when are the golf courses going to open up? And that's going to be a whole new unique thing, even just golf alone. Right now they're looking at considering opening up courses with a single person in each golf cart. So it's going to slow the rounds down. It's going to spread things out. They're trying to maintain that whole concept of golf with social distancing in place.
Yeah, interesting. Are you having any challenges with enforcement, or how are you, in terms of working?
I brought up the skateboarders because we were having a challenge with them. They're wonderful folks, but they love the park, and so it's, a lot of times we have our police are very. They're very understanding. So, but they do have to respond and say, folks, the skate park is closed at this time. As far as social distancing, like some of the decisions that were made for the town, following the stay-at-home guidance from the governor, is we closed several of our parks with playgrounds just because of the sanitary issues. Some of the challenges we're going to have is that our park system uses portalets in a lot of our parks. So do we bring those in? Can we keep them clean, or is that going to be an issue? Which is going to be an issue. How we keep the playgrounds, if we open them back up, how do we keep them clean? But some of our other parks, like our town forest, which is a 700-acre forest in the middle of town, that's opened up because the trails are wide open and people can social distance. We have a beautiful bike ped corridor that goes right through the town that has remained open. So we're trying to find that balance.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, do you see any opportunities coming out of this? I mean, so we're always trying to look for the silver lining.
Well, I really see right now the opportunity. I don't know if it's an opportunity or just an awareness of how important parks, recreation, and cultural resources is to our communities, because that's where we're getting the desires and the phone calls. When are we going to be able to get back? When are we going to be able to access? A lot of times, we're quietly successful. So I think that what this is doing is it's really reinforcing the health and wellness benefits the health and wellness benefits that we provide for the community. So I see that as being an opportunity of people just revisiting and reevaluating the value of parks, recreation, and community services. The other thing that I see the opportunity is we're very, the background behind me was artificial turf. We're very creative, in solving problems. In Redmond, as you can imagine, in the early 2000s, land was incredibly expensive. So we had to find ways of making the highest and best use of the existing facilities. So we found, wonderful sports field lighting and artificial turf. We doubled and tripled the use of our facilities. And I think that's what's going to happen here. We are going to find new ways that are going to stay with us for a long time in reconnecting and having quality connections with communities, whether it's through the virtual or the restructuring of our programs. I think that we have a brain trust in parks and recreation that has been creative over the years. And this is not the first challenge that we've had to adapt. And I think that's where our success is going to lie, in our ability to adapt.
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't agree more. I really believe, parks, recreation, open space, trails, all of our quality of life professionals are some of the most creative folks out there. And I do think that as a field, as a profession, one of the things that we've been a little bit remiss about is letting people know how important we are in their lives. And I think in some ways what we've been seeing is that people all over the country are suddenly, since they don't have access to these things that they've kind of taken for granted, that we're seeing a really, really strong support as people come forward. And so while it is a tragedy, and there's so many things that we have to deal with right now, especially wanting to make sure that we're looking at not only the immediate impact on health, with contacts and things like that, but also the potential long-term impacts. I mean, we're looking at, the inequities that may come from people who really have the social distancing, the loss of income that comes from that, the loss of physical activity, and just, the increased screen time. And we're looking at, from a public health standpoint, the preventive pieces of this are really challenging, because I don't think people understand how important Parks and Recreation is as a preventive public health provider. And so I personally am hopeful that will really start to rise to the top. And I guess just leading to a kind of a last question is, as you're going forward and you're talking to your decision makers, obviously all of us work in the public world, and do you report to a council or a town board? How are you set up?
The way we're set up in New Hampshire, I have an opportunity to report to, over the years, strong mayors, county commissions and stuff. But in New Hampshire, it's called the Board of Selectmen, and they're usually around a 5-person board. So it's a unique situation. First time I've ever had to report to this type of body.
Do you think that they are seeing the need for what we do, or is that getting through yet, or are they just so immersed in the kind of immediate response?
Salem has a unique history, not to go too far back, but their value system with the recreation at one time was not very high. And the good thing is the city manager or the town manager used to have my position. So it's, he's been in the position for about 1.5 years now. And so the recreation and, the health and wellness benefits of Parks and Recreation is definitely elevating. And I agree with you. I think a lot of people, we were, as an industry, we were moving towards the health and wellness initiative, even more so now with prescription wellness issues with doctors and service providers. So I think that this is just going to move it that much farther. Some of the benefits of Parks and Recreation is going to just be highlighted so much. Getting out and playing, connecting with people, community, special events, those types of things. One of the things that is gone sky high is the realization that camps and after school programs and a very cost-effective childcare that we provide, now that we're closed down, some of us have, programs have closed down, other programs are remaining open in certain communities to help the frontline workers. Parks and Recreation provides such a benefit to the community with our day camps and those type of things. So I'm hoping once we get, the treatments and hopefully the vaccines, that all of that will come back, because it's so needed for folks.
So my background is I have approximately 20 years of experience in Parks and Recreation in the government sector, and another 4 years in nonprofit before that. Working in a variety of jobs throughout. I started out in athletics and moved up to facility management, and then was doing some other things related to recruiting events. I worked with the town of Cary for 16 years and helped recruit high-profile regional, national sporting events to their 3 sports venues that they have. And then I was fortunate enough to get the assistant director job in Chapel Hill. And so I've been the assistant director in Chapel Hill for 5 years. Coming up in a couple weeks, it'll be 5 years actually. And right now in Chapel Hill, my first job obviously is assistant director, and I oversee the day-to-day operations of our department. So we've got a couple community centers. We have 2 indoor pools and 1 outdoor pool. We have athletics and Special Olympics and adapted recreation. And then we also have in our department, we oversee park maintenance. So we have our maintenance crew, and we manage the cemeteries. And we also manage the right-of-ways and have the arborist crew in our team. So I oversee the day-to-day operations of all of that. Right now, though, what my role is I am the operations section chief in our emergency operations center for the town. And so I rotate in and out with a couple other folks. So, you know, we're not there the entire time, but when I'm not there, I'm in a backup role supporting this person or the people that rotate out with me. And we are charged with helping all of the departments across the town implement the measures that we're putting in place in terms of dealing with this pandemic. So initially it was, how do we scale up our operations down, and how do we protect our employees and our citizens? And now we're starting to talk about how we are going to scale back up, and what is that going to look like, and then helping all the departments put their plans in place and helping them implement those plans as we move forward.
Wonderful. I know that you have been involved with GP Red's initiative, Operation Recreation Response. And so that's about preparing for, responding to, and recovering from disasters. And I know that as that initiative has emerged over the years, many years, we never expected anything like this current pandemic. And so I'm just wondering, as you're, with your experience of, obviously we're typically with ORR, we're thinking about natural disasters like hurricanes or tornadoes or flash floods or things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel that, what are the considerations for our Parks and Recreation agencies around the current pandemic? What kind of things are you seeing are being affected, and what do we need to think about as we start going into recovery?
Yeah, so, it is very different than all of those types of events, the natural disasters that we talked about, and even some of the man-made disasters that we have been thinking about. This one is just so, in all of the situations that we talked about before, there was this underlying assumption that there would be someone else somewhere else who would be able to come and help. If I wasn't affected, I would be able to go to, let's say, Florida and help out. And in this particular instance, we're all in this together, right? We're all in the same boat. And so we're all trying to figure it out simultaneously. And there's a lot of sharing going on, which is wonderful. Everybody is setting up webinars to get together and chat, and what are you going to do about this, and how are you going to handle that? And all those kinds of discussions are happening, which is great. And I think some of the things that people need to think about is, how do things affect your own community, right? Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different in every situation, and every community is going to have different facilities and different needs, and be on a different place in terms of where they are with the pandemic in their own community. So we're all, not only do we have different things we need to look at, we're all on a different timeline as well. And some of the major things that folks need to think about are, what are your state and local agencies beside yourself? If you're a local municipality, what's the county doing? What's the state doing? What's the federal government doing? So what are all those guidelines that are coming out, and how can you align your plans with those? And then some of the really important things to think about are safety, right? How do you keep your employees safe? How do you keep your citizens safe? And then thinking about the recovery, how can you, one of the things that we're doing in Chapel Hill is, how can we break that into manageable pieces, right? So we're breaking it up into segments and saying, okay, what do we need to do for our employees? What do we need to do for our customers? What do we need to do for our buildings and facilities? And then what do we need to do for our programs and events? And then what resource needs do we have for each one of those different categories? And how does that change when we go from phase to phase to phase, whatever that might look like in your community? I doubt everyone is going from closed, where we are now, to open. So what are those in-between phases, and how do you transition from one phase to the next?
Right, right. Well, that's a good point. So I know I can hear you. I know you're working from home right now. I can hear your pups in the background every once in a while. What are the considerations you have in mind as you're working with your other staff as they start to convert going back into the centers? What kind of things do you think are you suggesting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're in the middle of those discussions. I actually had one this morning with our group talking about our athletic leagues. And we've broken ours up into even smaller chunks than programs and events and facilities. We've broken it up even smaller than that, and are having some groups talk about different things like leagues and camps and general programs and things like that. But so some of the conversations we're having are, phase one for us in North Carolina is we're still limited to 10 people in gatherings. So, we're canceling a lot of our programs in Parks and Recreation because there's not a whole lot we can do with 10 people. As we move into phase two, that number expands, but we don't have definitive information from the state yet as to what that number will be. So we're putting some tentative plans in place. Okay, let's say it goes to 50. Okay, so we can start letting our athletic leagues have some programs. We can open our facilities on a limited basis and do some screening as folks come in the door. We can let people start to use the tennis and pickleball and outdoor courts and put up some guidelines for them too, right? Some guidelines like, hey, make sure you're thinking about bringing your own ball and labeling it and only serving with your ball so that you're not touching your opponent's ball. And when you need to get the ball to the other side of the net because it's your opponent's ball, whether it's tennis or pickleball, use your paddle and pick up the net and don't actually touch it with your hand. So you're not sharing germs in that way and continuing to make sure, we're starting out with singles play only for both pickleball and tennis is what we're going to be recommending to the players, and not don't play doubles. So all those kinds of things. Go ahead.
Playing racket sports, but not volleyball is what you're saying. I mean, because obviously
on the initial stage, yeah, we're not recommending volleyball or basketball or anything like that where you're sharing equipment. So phase one for us is racket sports, and we're recommending even with those to be individual play, singles rather than doubles, so that you don't have somebody right next to you on the court, and you're not risking yourself that way. We talked about a couple different options. Another option was to allow doubles play, but then to block off every other court. So you could have, if you've got 4 courts in a row, you could use 2 of them and leave 2 of them open. And we landed on let's go ahead and use all the courts, but let's do singles play, because even with doubles play, even when you're blocking off the other court, you've still got somebody right there on the same side of the net as you. And quite frequently you were getting very close to each other. And a lot of people's habits are to slap hands or touch each other when they make a good play. And so we're, kind of just to encourage that, to continue that distancing, we're going to recommend starting with singles.
So I know that as we're working with colleagues around the country, we have a lot of different agencies are just really making it up. I know some folks who operate pools are thinking that pools will be the first thing to open because they're all kind of disinfected already. They've got chlorine, whereas other things like gyms, maybe other agencies think gyms should be open first and pools should be last because there's a lot of fear of waterborne illness. How are you figuring out what to do versus, kind of making it up yourselves versus looking at what other agencies are doing? How are you processing that?
We're doing a little bit of both. We have our staff going to different webinars and joining different chat groups and doing the research to see what other agencies are doing, both locally and across the country. And we're also, like I mentioned before, we have divided our staff into small teams, and we have different teams working on each one of these different areas. So we have a team that's getting together and talking about our parks and how do we want to open the parks. And we have a group that's getting together and talking about the pools and how do we want to open the pools. And we have one shared document. One of the really interesting things for our community was we were preparing to go to Office 365 and implement some of the new tools, and this pandemic hit and they kind of just threw it at us and said, here you go, figure it out. So kind of sink or swim, but it's been really cool because we're swimming, maybe doggy paddle, but we're swimming. And we're getting to use all these new tools. So we have all these new sharing tools. So we're using office teams. And so we're able to share documents and have them open and be on these conference calls and looking at the document and editing it and making changes. And we can also see what the other groups are doing because they're contributing to the same file. So the group that's working on athletic leagues, for instance, can see what the group that is working on fields and what the group that is working on community centers are saying, to kind of make sure that they're aligning their recommendations with what the other groups are coming up with within our community. And like I said, so we're doing a little bit of both. We're doing a little bit of, what makes sense for us locally, what do we think is the best for our community, and what is everybody else doing to help us form those choices and make those choices.
Wonderful. Well, I do want to thank you. I know that you have provided a template that you have created, and I know that it's focused on the restrictions that are current in North Carolina, but I'd like to make that template available to our colleagues. And so we'll make that available as both an Excel sheet and a PDF, because one of the things I've been doing is using your template, been collecting all the things we're hearing through GP Red and Greenplay around the country, and I've kind of filled in the template a little bit. So we'll make that one available in terms of considerations for employees and facilities and programs and all those different categories that you've been talking about. I think one of the things I appreciate is that you've been very well organized in terms of looking at these under different categories, and they kind of directly relate to agencies can fill it. They obviously have to be customized, and they're going to be a little bit different in every agency in every state, but it's been a nice organized way for people to start to pull together just this huge variety of information that's coming at us every single day. And even though there's so much coming in, we all want to pay attention to it, whether it's internal or external. I think that the challenge going into reopening for a lot of folks is how to filter out what's really going to work at your specific agency versus just because somebody else says it's working there. I don't know, are you seeing any, one thing I see is a lot of political influence, and that we always have that because we work in the public sector, of course, but in terms of, as you're making decisions, are you having to, as these decisions are made, are you having to take them to your council, or is everybody just kind of doing what you think is best for reopening within certain guidelines right now?
So we are not taking things to council per se, no. And then in terms of your question about where we take the information, we are using the National Incident Management System structure, NIMS, in our community. So we have our Emergency Operations Center set up. And like I said, I'm the operations section chief, and we have our emergency manager and our planning group and our policy group. So the way it's working for us is the departments are filtering their information to the Emergency Operations Center through the operations section. And we take a look at it and see if we have any questions. And then we filter it on up to the policy group. And the policy group is made up of the majority of the town leadership. So the manager, the assistant manager, the deputy, business management, HRD, the attorney, all those folks at that level. And they're making decisions there. And if the town manager feels like it's something that he needs to share with council, he does it from that policy group. But for us, the decisions are being made at the staff level in that policy group, and then being filtered back down through the EOC, and then we share it back out with the departments once it gets back to the operations section, and we share that out with the departments. For us locally, we have been very fortunate in our community that our political leaders have been very great about allowing staff to make those decisions and being satisfied with just being informed and knowing what's going on. And the town manager has done a fantastic job in keeping them informed and keeping them in the loop, but they are allowing the structure to work the way that it should. And it really seems to be functioning quite well for us.
Two key things that I heard is that you are operating under the NIM system, and that's similar to any other kind of natural event, natural disaster. So you've got that structure in place. So this is in some ways under a similar response, and even though you're having to kind of create a whole new set of guidelines for moving forward. Is there any other considerations that you think that we should have our colleagues keep in mind as we're addressing these issues?
So I think one of the things that you mentioned there that popped in my mind was you were talking about the NIM structure and using it for, it's similar to us in that we use it for other natural disasters. And I think the one big difference that applies not only to the NIM structure, but to considerations that we need to keep in mind for our staff and our communities as well is that the duration of this event is unlike anything else that we experience normally with these natural disasters, right? Most of them are, a snowstorm, it's here, you suffer through it through a few days for most of us, and then life gets back to more normal. At least that's the way that it is in the South, 2 or 3 days, and we're back to regular. Other parts of the country might last a little bit longer, but nowhere, most of the time we're not dealing with several weeks or months on end. So some of the things that we have to keep in mind is people's fatigue. Not only fatigue from doing different roles, but fatigue from the stress of the event itself, and fatigue from feeling cooped up at home. There's just all the stressors are so different for this kind of event. And so we really need to keep that in mind and make sure that we're checking on our people and making sure that they are doing okay. In addition to all of the things that we need to do for our job, we need to make sure that we're checking on our people. Because they are still people at the end of the day. They're still people, and they still have all of those emotional needs that we need to make sure that we are also taking care of as well.
This episode of GP Red Presents is part of a GP Red special initiative called Operation Recreation Response, with a focus on helping agencies prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. If you are interested in becoming involved with ORR, please email info@gpred.org.